You felt it before. That moment when you finish explaining a complex concept and sit back, satisfied with your brilliance, only to realize hours later that you fundamentally misunderstood the entire thing. Or perhaps you've watched someone argue passionately about a topic they clearly know nothing about, yet they remain utterly convinced of their expertise. These aren't just moments of confusion. They're glimpses into one of the most dangerous cognitive traps humans fall into: the intelligence delusion. The smarter you think you are, the more vulnerable you become. Intelligence, that quality we celebrate and pursue, often serves as the perfect disguise for our most profound self-deceptions. And what makes this delusion particularly insidious is that the people most affected by it are precisely the ones least equipped to recognize it in themselves. While we mock the ignorant for their lack of knowledge, we rarely confront the educated for their overconfidence. Yet history shows that some of the most catastrophic decisions weren't made by fools, but by brilliant minds trapped in the echo chambers of their own intelligence. Today, we're diving into the psychology behind this phenomenon, the mechanisms that transform our cognitive strengths into psychological vulnerabilities, and why the phrase, "I know," might be the most dangerous assertion in human thought. The illusion of explanatory depth. In 2002, psychologists Frank Keel and Leonid Rosenblatt documented a fascinating cognitive bias. They asked participants to rate their understanding of everyday objects like toilets, zippers, and bicycles. Most people expressed high confidence in their knowledge. Then they asked these same people to write detailed explanations of how these objects actually worked. The results were revealing. When forced to articulate their understanding, participants discovered enormous gaps in their knowledge. What they thought was comprehensive understanding was actually a vague, superficial familiarity. After this exercise, they dramatically lowered their self-assessments. This is the illusion of explanatory depth, our persistent belief that we understand things far better than we actually do. But here's what makes it relevant to our discussion. This illusion doesn't diminish with education, it often intensifies. Consider climate change. Ask most educated people if they understand it, and they'll confidently say yes. Ask them to explain the specific mechanisms by which methane traps heat differently than carbon dioxide, or how ocean acidification impacts carbon sequestration, and watch confidence crumble. The problem isn't that we don't know things, it's that we don't know what we don't know. And the more educated we become, the better we get at disguising these gaps, not just from others, but from ourselves. This explains why experts can be simultaneously brilliant and blind. The physicist who scoffs at religious belief while unable to articulate the theological arguments they're dismissing. The economist who ridicules opposing theories without grasping their foundational premises. The philosopher who dismisses scientific findings without understanding the methodology behind them. Intelligence doesn't eliminate the illusion of explanatory depth. It provides more sophisticated language to mask it. The Dunning Krueger effect and its inverse. Most people are familiar with the Dunning Krueger effect, the cognitive bias where people with limited knowledge overestimate their expertise. The incompetent lack the very skills needed to recognize their incompetence. What receives less attention is what we might call the inverse Dunning Krueger effect, the tendency of genuine experts to overestimate how much their expertise in one domain transfers to others. The physicist who believes their understanding of quantum mechanics qualifies them to make pronouncements about consciousness. The neuroscientist who thinks mapping brain structures provides insight into philosophical questions of free will. The successful entrepreneur who assumes their business acumen translates into political expertise. Intelligence in one domain creates a halo effect that bleeds into others, leading to what philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein called bewitchment by language. The belief that because we can talk about something using technical vocabulary, we must understand it. This helps explain why intelligent people often make catastrophic errors in judgment outside their fields. Their intelligence doesn't just fail to protect them, it actively misleads them by providing a false sense of mastery over unfamiliar territory. The hedge fund manager long-term capital management, led by Nobel Prize-winning economists, collapsed spectacularly in 1998, requiring a $3.6 billion bailout. Their sophisticated mathematical models failed to account for what couldn't be quantified: market psychology and liquidity crises. Their intelligence became a liability when it bred overconfidence in domains where their expertise didn't apply. The backfire effect. Intelligence doesn't just fail to protect us from error, it can actively entrench us in it. This is the backfire effect, where presenting evidence against someone's beliefs often strengthens rather than weakens those beliefs. Psychologist David McRaney describes it this way: when your deepest convictions are challenged by contradictory evidence, your beliefs get stronger. This happens because intelligent people possess greater resources for counter-argument. When presented with evidence contradicting their views, the average person might struggle to find flaws in the argument. The intelligent person rapidly generates multiple counterpoints, exceptions, and alternative interpretations. Their mental agility becomes a defense mechanism against changing their mind. Studies show that the more knowledgeable someone is about a polarizing political issue, the more likely they are to dismiss contradictory evidence. Their knowledge doesn't lead to more balanced understanding. It provides more ammunition for motivated reasoning. Consider climate change denial among educated conservatives or anti-GMO sentiment among educated liberals. In both cases, intelligence correlates not with accuracy, but with the ability to defend pre-existing positions. The educated climate skeptic doesn't lack information. They've developed elaborate frameworks for rejecting information that contradicts their worldview. Intelligence doesn't eliminate bias. It arms bias with better weapons. The curse of knowledge. Once we know something, we find it nearly impossible to remember what it was like not to know it. This is the curse of knowledge, our inability to recreate the mental state of ignorance after acquiring information. This curse has profound implications for how intelligent people perceive others. The expert mathematician can't understand why students struggle with basic algebra. The literary scholar can't fathom how someone misses symbolic references in a text. The philosopher can't comprehend why laypeople don't grasp distinctions they find obvious. This creates a dangerous empathy gap. Intelligence often correlates with decreased ability to understand how others think, not because intelligent people lack compassion, but because they can't simulate minds with less information than their own. This leads to what psychologists call naive realism, the belief that we see reality objectively, while those who disagree are biased or uninformed. The more educated we become, the more difficulty we have imagining how reasonable people could reach different conclusions. This explains why academic debates become so bitter and why intelligent people often resort to pathologizing disagreement. If I see the truth clearly and you disagree, you must be ignorant, irrational, or malicious. My intelligence becomes not just a tool for understanding the world, but a barrier to understanding others. The integration fallacy. Perhaps the most dangerous aspect of the intelligence delusion is what we might call the integration fallacy. The belief that our knowledge forms a coherent, consistent whole when it actually consists of isolated fragments that often contradict each other. Psychologist Robert Kurzban argues that the human mind isn't a unified entity, but a collection of modules that evolved to solve different problems. These modules often operate independently, leading to contradictory beliefs that we rarely bring into direct confrontation. The scientist who applies rigorous standards of evidence in the laboratory but accepts religious claims without the same scrutiny. The ethicist who advocates for animal rights while wearing leather. The environmentalist who condemns fossil fuels while taking international flights. Intelligence doesn't automatically integrate our knowledge into a consistent whole. Instead, it makes us better at compartmentalizing contradictions and rationalizing inconsistencies. The more intelligent we are, the more sophisticated our mechanisms for avoiding cognitive dissonance. This creates what philosopher John Gray calls the deception of the intellect, the illusion that our beliefs form a rational, coherent system when they actually reflect a patchwork of intuitions, cultural influences, and motivated reasoning that we post hoc justify. Intelligence as social currency. Why do these delusions persist despite their obvious dangers? Because intelligence functions not just as a tool for understanding reality, but as social currency that signals status and group belonging. Evolutionary psychologist Jeffrey Miller suggests that much of human intelligence evolved not to solve practical problems, but as a courtship display similar to the peacock's tail. Costly, extravagant, and designed to advertise genetic fitness. This explains why we often use intelligence not to reach accurate conclusions, but to demonstrate our intellectual prowess. The student who asks deliberately complex questions not to gain understanding, but to display knowledge. The academic who uses unnecessarily technical language not for precision, but to signal intelligence. When intelligence becomes primarily about social signaling, accuracy becomes secondary to impression management. The goal shifts from being right to appearing smart, from seeking truth to seeking status. This creates perverse incentives where admitting ignorance or changing one's mind is seen not as intellectual growth, but as loss of face. The more publicly and forcefully we've defended a position, the more painful it becomes to acknowledge error. Transcending the delusion. Is there hope for escaping these cognitive traps? Yes, but the path forward requires a fundamental reimagining of what intelligence means. True intelligence isn't about accumulating knowledge, but about recognizing its limits. It's not about being right, but about becoming progressively less wrong. It's not about defending positions, but about updating them in response to evidence. The physicist Richard Feynman embodied this approach when he said, "I would rather have questions that can't be answered than answers that can't be questioned." His genius lay not just in what he knew, but in his comfort with uncertainty and his willingness to say, "I don't know." This points to what philosopher Jacob Needleman calls the wisdom of not knowing. The recognition that intellectual humility isn't the enemy of intelligence, but its highest expression. Practically, transcending the intelligence delusion requires several shifts in how we think about thinking. First, we must distinguish between understanding and familiarity. Just because a concept feels familiar doesn't mean we understand it. The test of understanding isn't recognition, but application and explanation. Second, we must become comfortable with epistemic triage, acknowledging that we can't be experts in everything and must rely on others' expertise in most domains. This requires developing what philosopher Miranda Fricker calls testimonial justice, the ability to assess expertise without succumbing to either naive acceptance or reflexive skepticism. Third, we must shift from viewing intelligence as a possession to seeing it as a process. Intelligence isn't something we have, but something we do. Specifically, the ongoing process of revising our beliefs to better align with reality. Finally, we must recognize that the most dangerous words in intellectual life aren't "I don't know," but "I know." Certainty is where thinking ends and dogma begins. But there's something else going on here, something deeper than mere cognitive bias. Could it be that what we call intelligence is itself fundamentally misunderstood? That the very concept contains assumptions that lead us astray? More on that next week when we explore how our entire conception of intelligence might be built on a foundation of philosophical quicksand. For now, consider this. The next time you feel absolute certainty about your beliefs, the next time you dismiss someone else's view without fully understanding it, the next time you feel intellectually superior, pause. In that moment of certainty, you might be experiencing not the height of your intelligence, but its greatest vulnerability. The truly intelligent mind isn't marked by conviction, but by curiosity, not by certainty, but by wonder. Perhaps real intelligence begins precisely where our delusions about it end.